One of the saddest truths about life is that the moment you start growing, some people begin disappearing. Lucas learned this lesson at 25 years old, and it happened so slowly that at first, he did not even notice it. Every Friday night, he used to sit with the same group of friends at a small diner near the edge of town. They laughed about old memories, complained about work, talked about people they disliked, and wasted hours making fun of dreams they were too afraid to chase themselves. For years, Lucas thought this was what friendship looked like. Comfortable, familiar, safe. But over time, something inside him began to change. It started quietly. One evening after work, Lucas walked into a bookstore to escape the rain. While waiting for the storm to pass, he picked up a book about discipline and purpose. He did not know why, but for the first time in years, he felt awake. The words inside the book made him question everything about his life. After that night, Lucas slowly changed his routine. He started waking up earlier every morning. He stopped wasting hours scrolling through his phone. Instead of sleeping until noon on weekends, he spent time reading, exercising, and learning new skills online. He even began saving money to leave the small town he had lived in his entire life. At first, nobody noticed. But then the comments started. "Why are you acting different lately?" one friend asked. Another laughed and said, "Bro thinks he's going to become a millionaire now." Lucas forced a smile every time he heard those words, but deep down, they hurt more than he wanted to admit. These were people he had known for years, people he once trusted like family. Yet every time he tried to improve himself, they made him feel guilty for changing. One cold evening in October, Lucas sat with them again at the diner. Outside the window, rain tapped softly against the glass while old country music played quietly through the speakers overhead. One of his friends began mocking a guy from their old high school who had moved to Chicago to start a business. Everyone laughed except Lucas. "At least he tried to build something," Lucas said calmly. The table suddenly became quiet. One friend leaned back in his chair and smirked. "Listen to this guy," he said. "You used to be fun. Now all you do is talk about goals and growth." Another friend shook his head and added, "People change when they start thinking they're better than everyone else." Lucas felt something heavy settle inside his chest. For the first time, he realized he no longer belonged there. The laughter around the table sounded distant now, almost like noise from another room. And even though he was surrounded by people, he had never felt so alone in his life. Later that night, Lucas walked home under the rain with his hands in his pockets and his mind full of questions. Why did improving himself make people uncomfortable? Why did some friendships begin to fade the moment he started taking his future seriously? As he crossed the old wooden bridge near the edge of town, he noticed an elderly man standing quietly beside the railing, staring into the dark river below. Then the old man slowly turned toward Lucas and said something that would change his life forever. The old man kept his eyes on the river for a few seconds before speaking again. "Most people believe relationships end because of arguments," he said softly. "But many relationships end because one person begins to grow while the other stays the same." Lucas stood silently under the rain, unsure why those words hit him so deeply. The man looked to be around 70 years old. He wore a long brown coat, old leather boots, and a gray hat that had clearly survived many winters. Beside him stood a small wooden lantern glowing softly against the darkness of the bridge. "I am sorry," Lucas finally said. "Do we know each other?" The old man smiled gently and shook his head. "No, but I know that look." Lucas frowned slightly. "What look?" "The look of someone grieving people who are still alive." Lucas felt chills run through his body, and for a moment, the sound of rain and rushing water beneath the bridge seemed to disappear completely. The old man slowly walked toward the center of the bridge and rested one hand on the wooden railing. "This bridge has been here for more than 50 years, he said. "I have watched thousands of people cross it. Families, friends, couples, dreamers. Some crossed together and stayed together. Others started together but slowly walked in different directions." Lucas listened carefully. Something about the man's calm voice made him feel safe enough to open the parts of himself he usually hid from others. "I just do not understand," Lucas admitted quietly. "Why do people get uncomfortable when you start trying to improve your life?" The old man smiled again, but this time there was sadness behind it. "Because growth creates distance," he replied. "And distance frightens people who were comfortable with the old version of you." Lucas stared down at the river below. The water moved slowly beneath the bridge, carrying fallen leaves into the darkness. But I never tried to hurt anyone, Lucas said. I still care about my friends. I know, the old man answered. But some people only feel comfortable around the version of you that needed their approval. Those words settled heavily inside Lucas. He thought back to the diner. Every joke, every comment, every moment he stayed silent just to avoid tension. For years, he had made himself smaller so others would not feel insecure around him. The old man pointed toward the far side of the bridge where the town lights faded into darkness. Do you see that? He asked. Lucas nodded. When people decide to grow, it is like stepping into fog, the old man continued. You cannot fully see where the road leads. It is uncomfortable, lonely, uncertain. But the people who refuse to grow often stay where it feels familiar. And sometimes, when they see you moving forward, it reminds them of all the dreams they abandoned. Lucas felt his chest tighten. Deep down, he knew the old man was right. His friends had not become cruel overnight. They simply became uncomfortable watching someone close to them change in ways they were afraid to change themselves. The rain slowly began to weaken, and the night air became colder around them. Lucas looked at the old man and asked quietly, "So what am I supposed to do when the people I love stop understanding me?" The old man stared toward the far end of the bridge for a long moment before answering. "Tomorrow night," he said softly, "come back here at exactly 9 o'clock. Then I will show you why some people never cross the bridge." The next day felt longer than usual for Lucas. Even while sitting at work, he could not stop thinking about the old man on the bridge. Every sentence the man had spoken kept replaying in his mind. Some people only feel comfortable around the version of you that needed their approval. The words followed him everywhere. During lunch break, Lucas sat alone outside the building with a sandwich in his hand while his co-workers laughed nearby. For the first time, he started noticing how often people bonded through negativity, complaining about jobs, mocking people who succeeded, judging strangers they did not even know. It was easier for people to connect through bitterness than through growth. Later that evening, one of his old friends texted him and invited him to the diner again. Lucas hesitated for several seconds before agreeing. Part of him still hoped things could go back to normal. When he arrived, the same familiar scene greeted him. The smell of coffee filled the air. Neon lights flickered softly against the windows. Country music played quietly overhead. His friends laughed loudly in the corner booth like they always did. But this time, something felt different. Lucas noticed details he had ignored for years. Every conversation revolved around blaming someone else. One friend hated his boss, but refused to search for a better job. Another constantly complained about money while spending hundreds of dollars every month on things he did not need. Whenever someone mentioned goals or self-improvement, the group quickly turned it into a joke. Halfway through the night, one of them looked at Lucas and asked, "So are you still waking up at 5 in the morning like some motivational guru?" Everyone laughed. Lucas smiled politely. "It helps me clear my mind before work," he answered calmly. Another friend shook his head. "Man, I could never live like that. Life is already hard enough." Lucas almost responded, but then he stopped himself. The old version of him would have argued or tried to explain himself, but now he simply listened. And the more he listened, the more he realized something painful. Most of them were not truly angry at him. They were angry because his choices quietly exposed the excuses they kept telling themselves every day. Suddenly, one friend leaned forward and asked, "Why are you trying so hard anyway? We are all just regular people." Lucas stared down at the table for a moment. Deep inside, he knew this question had controlled his entire life. He had spent years shrinking his dreams because he was afraid of making others uncomfortable. He was afraid of becoming different. Afraid of being alone. The conversation around him slowly faded into background noise as a strange feeling settled inside his chest. It was not anger. It was clarity. For years, Lucas thought loyalty meant staying the same with the same people forever. But now he was beginning to understand that real growth sometimes requires leaving old versions of yourself behind. Around 8:30 that night, Lucas quietly stood from the booth and grabbed his jacket. "Leaving already?" someone asked. Lucas nodded gently. "Yeah, I have somewhere I need to be." As he stepped outside into the cold autumn air, he looked back through the diner window one last time. His friends were already laughing again without him. For some reason, that hurt less than he expected. 20 minutes later, Lucas reached the old wooden bridge once more. Fog rolled softly over the river beneath it, and the lantern beside the railing glowed faintly in the darkness. The old man was already there waiting for him. This time, however, there was something unusual beside him on the bridge. Two old wooden chairs faced opposite directions, and without saying a single word, the old man pointed toward one of them. Lucas slowly sat down in the wooden chair while the old man remained standing beside the lantern. Cold wind drifted across the bridge, carrying the smell of rain and river water through the night air. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Then the old man pointed toward the second chair facing the opposite direction. "Do you know why these chairs face away from each other?" he asked quietly. Lucas shook his head. The old man smiled gently. "Because this is what happens to many people in life. They begin their journey side by side, but eventually their minds start facing different directions." Lucas looked at the empty chair carefully. The wood was old and worn, with scratches carved deep into the surface from years of storms and changing seasons. "A long time ago," the old man continued, "I used to sit on this bridge with my closest friend every single week. We grew up together, worked together, dreamed together. We promised nothing would ever change between us." Lucas listened closely while the lantern flickered softly beside them. "But life changed us in different ways," the old man said. "I wanted to learn, to grow, to build a meaningful life. My friend only wanted comfort. Every year, our conversations became smaller. Every dream became a joke to him. Eventually, we could sit beside each other for hours and still feel miles apart." Lucas lowered his eyes. The story felt painfully familiar. "Did you stop being friends?" he asked softly. The old man took a slow breath before answering. "No, not all endings happen with anger. Some relationships simply fade because two people no longer recognize each other." The river below moved quietly beneath the bridge as Lucas thought about the people in his own life. For years, he believed friendship meant never changing. But now he wondered if holding on to old versions of people was sometimes what caused the deepest pain. The old man sat down in the second chair and stared into the darkness ahead. "Most people think growth is only about success," he said. "Better jobs, more money, bigger goals. But true growth changes the way you think, the way you speak, the way you spend your time. And once your mind changes, your old environment begins to feel unfamiliar." Lucas slowly nodded. He remembered how excited he once felt discussing new ideas and goals, only to watch his friends mock every serious conversation. At first, he laughed along because he did not want to lose them. But each time he stayed silent, a small part of him felt dishonest. "Why does it hurt so much?" Lucas finally asked. "Why does growing feel lonely?" "Sometimes." The old man looked at him with calm understanding. "Because humans are emotional creatures," he answered gently. "Your heart remembers who people used to be, even after your mind realizes they can no longer walk beside you." Lucas felt those words deeply. For the first time, he stopped blaming himself for changing. Maybe he was not becoming cold or selfish. Maybe he was simply becoming aware. The old man reached down beside his chair and picked up a small compass from the wooden floor of the bridge. The glass covering it was cracked with age, but the needle inside still moved steadily north. He handed it to Lucas carefully. "This compass belonged to my old friend," he said softly. "One night he told me something I never forgot." Lucas looked down at the compass in his hands while the wind moved softly around them. Then the old man leaned closer and quietly said, "Tomorrow, I want you to bring someone you care about to this bridge. Then you will finally understand why some people never cross into your future." The next morning, Lucas could not stop thinking about the old man's request. Bring someone you care about to the bridge. The words stayed in his mind all day like an unfinished question waiting for an answer. Around sunset, Lucas finally sent a message to his closest friend, Ryan. Out of everyone in the group, Ryan had always been the person Lucas trusted most. They had grown up together, played basketball together every summer, and spent countless nights talking about life while sitting on the hood of Lucas's old pickup truck beneath the stars. Even now, Lucas still believed Ryan understood him better than anyone else. When Ryan agreed to meet, Lucas felt a small sense of relief. Maybe things were not as broken as they seemed. By 9 o'clock that evening, the fog had returned to the river once again. The old wooden bridge stood quietly beneath the pale moonlight, while the lantern near the railing flickered against the wind. The old man was already there waiting when Lucas and Ryan arrived. Ryan looked around with confusion. "What is this place?" he asked quietly. Lucas hesitated before answering. I met someone here a few nights ago. He has been teaching me something important. Ryan glanced at the old man suspiciously before forcing a small laugh. You are seriously taking life advice from some random guy on a bridge now. Lucas ignored the comment. The old man stepped forward calmly and greeted Ryan with a warm smile. Thank you for coming, he said gently. Ryan shoved his hands into his jacket pockets and shrugged. Sure, but I still do not understand why I am here. The old man pointed toward the far end of the bridge where the darkness swallowed the road ahead. Tonight, he said softly, I want both of you to walk across this bridge together. Ryan frowned immediately. That is it. The old man nodded. But there is one condition. While walking, each of you must speak honestly about the future you want for your life. Ryan laughed under his breath. Sounds weird, but fine. The two friends slowly began walking side by side across the old wooden bridge. Their footsteps echoed softly against the damp planks beneath them. At first, the conversation felt normal. Lucas spoke about wanting to move to a bigger city someday. He talked about building a meaningful career, surrounding himself with ambitious people, and becoming the kind of man he could truly respect. Ryan listened quietly for a few moments before shaking his head. Man, you think too much, he said. Why can you not just relax and enjoy life? Lucas smiled slightly. I am trying to build a better future. Ryan sighed heavily. For what? Most people never become anything special anyway. Lucas slowed his steps. There was no anger in Ryan's voice. Only exhaustion. The kind that comes from someone who stopped believing life could become better a long time ago. Do you ever think about changing your life? Lucas asked carefully. Ryan looked down at the river below and shrugged. Honestly, no. I think people who chase all those big dreams just end up disappointed. Lucas felt a strange sadness settle inside him. For years, he and Ryan used to dream together about traveling, starting businesses, and building a different future. But somewhere along the way, Ryan stopped believing those things were possible. And now, every dream sounded foolish. To him, halfway across the bridge, Ryan suddenly stopped walking. I do not get you anymore, he admitted quietly. You used to feel like me. Now it feels like you are becoming someone else. Lucas stared at his friend in silence while cold wind moved through the fog around them. Then, from behind them, the old man's calm voice echoed softly through the darkness. That, he said, is exactly where most friendships begin to break apart. Ryan stood motionless in the middle of the bridge while fog drifted slowly around them. The old man walked toward the two friends with calm steps, his lantern casting soft light across the wet wooden planks beneath their feet. Most people believe friendships end because of betrayal, he said gently. But many friendships end because one person keeps growing while the other becomes afraid of change. Ryan crossed his arms and looked away. So now I am afraid of change? He asked defensively. The old man smiled kindly. Not afraid of change itself. Afraid of what change might demand from you. Silence filled the bridge again. Lucas looked at Ryan carefully. For years, he had never truly noticed how tired his friend looked. The exhaustion in Ryan's eyes was deeper than frustration. It looked like someone who quietly gave up on himself without ever admitting it out loud. I used to dream too, Ryan suddenly said. His voice was softer now. Back in high school, remember? We talked about moving out west someday, starting our own business, traveling across the country. Lucas nodded slowly. Yeah, I remember. Ryan laughed quietly, but there was sadness behind it. Then life happened. Bills happened. Reality happened. The old man listened without interrupting. Ryan looked toward the dark river below the bridge and continued speaking. After a while, it just became easier not to expect much from life anymore. Lucas felt pain in his chest hearing those words. Because deep down, he realized something important. Ryan was not trying to hold him back out of cruelty. He was trying to protect himself from disappointment. The old man stepped closer to the railing and pointed toward the water moving beneath them. Do you see the river? He asked softly. Both men nodded. The river never apologizes for flowing forward, the old man continued. And because it keeps moving, it eventually reaches places still water never will. Ryan remained silent. The old man turned toward him gently. But people often resent movement when they have spent years standing still. Those words hung heavily in the cold night air. Lucas finally understood why every attempt to improve himself created tension around his friendships. His growth was not directly hurting anyone. but it silently challenged the comfort of people who stopped believing change was possible for themselves. Ryan sighed deeply and sat down near the railing. I do not know, he admitted quietly. Sometimes when I hear Lucas talk about goals and growth, it makes me feel like I wasted years of my life. Lucas immediately shook his head. I never wanted you to feel that way. I know, Ryan replied. But it still happens. The old man nodded slowly, as if he had heard this conversation many times before. That is why growth changes relationships, he explained. Not because successful people become cruel, but because growth forces everyone around them to confront who they have become. The lantern beside them flickered softly as wind moved through the bridge once again. Lucas looked at Ryan and realized how many years both of them had hidden behind humor and routine instead of speaking honestly about their fears. For the first time in a long while, Lucas no longer felt angry at his friends. He simply felt sad for all the dreams they buried under comfort and doubt. The old man reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to Lucas carefully. Tomorrow morning, he said softly, I want you to read this before sunrise. Then you will understand the hardest truth about becoming a different person. Lucas unfolded the paper slowly beneath the lantern light. On it was written only one sentence. The people who truly love your future will never ask you to shrink your potential to protect their comfort. Lucas barely slept that night. The sentence written on the folded paper stayed inside his mind long after he returned home. The people who truly love your future will never ask you to shrink your potential to protect their comfort. He read those words again just before sunrise while sitting beside his apartment window with a cup of black coffee in his hands. Outside, the town still looked the same as it always had. Quiet streets, empty sidewalks, familiar buildings frozen in routine. But something inside Lucas no longer felt the same. For the first time in years, he realized he had spent most of his life trying to stay emotionally acceptable to everyone around him. He avoided speaking too passionately about his goals because he did not want others to feel insecure. He laughed at jokes that secretly hurt him. He downplayed his ambitions so nobody would accuse him of changing. Slowly, without noticing it, he had trained himself to remain small enough to fit inside other people's comfort zones. Later that afternoon, Lucas went back to the diner alone. The same waitress greeted him warmly while country music played softly through the old speakers overhead. Everything looked familiar, but this time he observed the room differently. He noticed tired faces staring into phones, couples sitting together without speaking, groups of friends repeating the same conversations they probably repeated every week for years. Suddenly, Lucas understood something painful. Many people were not truly living. They were simply surviving familiar routines because familiarity felt safer than transformation. A few minutes later, Ryan walked into the diner and sat across from him quietly. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Finally, Ryan sighed heavily and rubbed his hands together. I kept thinking about what that old man said last night, he admitted. Lucas nodded slowly. Me too. Ryan stared out the window before speaking again. You know what scares me the most? Lucas looked at him carefully. What? Ryan swallowed hard before answering. What if you are right to keep moving forward, and I have just been standing still for years? Lucas felt sadness in his chest hearing those words. You are not stuck forever, he said gently. You can still change your life. Ryan laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. Maybe, but changing your life sounds exhausting when you already feel tired all the time. Lucas understood exactly what he meant. Growth looked exciting from the outside, but in reality, it demanded painful honesty. It forced people to confront their habits, fears, excuses, and wasted years. Many people avoided growth not because they were lazy, but because deep down they were afraid of discovering how much of their life they had settled for. Ryan looked down at the table quietly. I think part of me misses who we used to be, he admitted. Back when life felt simpler. Lucas smiled faintly. I miss that too sometimes. Ryan looked up at him carefully. Do you think people can stay close while changing in different ways? Lucas thought for several seconds before answering honestly. Only if both people respect each other's growth. Ryan slowly nodded, but his silence afterward revealed something deeper. Lucas realized his friend was standing at a crossroads inside himself. One path required remaining comfortable and familiar. The other required facing uncertainty, discipline, and personal responsibility. And for the first time, Lucas understood something the old man had been trying to teach him all along. Growth does not just change your future. It exposes the hidden fears inside every relationship around you. As evening approached, Ryan suddenly stood from the booth and grabbed his jacket. "I need some time to think," he said quietly. Lucas nodded in understanding. Before leaving, Ryan paused near the door and looked back at him one last time. "You know," he said softly, "part of me hopes you never stop becoming who you are trying to become." Then Ryan walked out into the fading sunlight, leaving Lucas alone with a feeling he could not fully explain. Because for the first time in weeks, losing people no longer felt like failure. It felt like the painful beginning of becoming someone new. 3 days passed before Lucas returned to the bridge again. During those days, something inside him had quietly shifted. He still went to work, still walked through the same streets, still passed the same people every morning. But now he noticed how many lives were built entirely around emotional comfort. People stayed in jobs they hated because uncertainty frightened them. They stayed in relationships that drained them because loneliness felt unbearable. They stayed connected to old identities simply because change required courage. And for the first time in his life, Lucas understood that growing into a new version of yourself often means grieving the old world that once made you feel safe. That evening, the bridge stood silent beneath a dark blue sky while cold wind moved across the river below. The old man sat alone in one of the wooden chairs with the lantern glowing softly beside him. As Lucas approached, the old man looked up and smiled gently. "You look different," he said. Lucas sat down slowly across from him. "I think I finally understand what you were trying to teach me." The old man nodded calmly. "Then tell me." Lucas stared toward the river for several seconds before speaking. "People do not always leave because you hurt them. Sometimes they leave because your growth reminds them of what they abandoned inside themselves." The old man's smile widened slightly. "Yes," he said softly, "and that realization changes everything." Lucas leaned back in the chair while the cold night air surrounded them. "I used to think losing people meant I was doing something wrong," he admitted. "But now I think some relationships are only meant for certain versions of us." The old man nodded again. "Every stage of life introduces you to different people," he explained. "Some are meant to build you, some are meant to test you, and some are only meant to walk beside you until your path changes direction." Lucas lowered his eyes quietly. "It still hurts, though." "Of course it does," the old man replied gently. "Growth is not only about becoming stronger. It is also about learning how to release what no longer belongs to your future." Those words settled deeply inside Lucas. For years, he had fought desperately to keep every relationship alive, even when he secretly felt himself outgrowing the connection. He thought loyalty meant holding on to everyone forever. But now he realized true loyalty also includes being honest about who you are becoming. The old man slowly stood from his chair and walked toward the center of the bridge. Lucas followed him quietly. Together, they stared at the dark water flowing beneath them. "Look at the river carefully," the old man said. "Notice how it never fights to return upstream. It keeps moving toward where it is meant to go." Lucas watched the current silently. People suffer when they try to force old versions of themselves to survive forever, the old man continued. But life was never designed for permanent sameness. Every season changes us. Every lesson changes us. Every heartbreak changes us. Lucas felt something inside his chest finally relax. For the first time in months, he stopped feeling guilty for changing. He stopped feeling ashamed for wanting more from life. And most importantly, he stopped blaming others for being unable to walk the same path with him forever. Suddenly, Lucas looked toward the empty side of the bridge where fog slowly swallowed the road ahead. "Do you think I will ever stop feeling lonely?" he asked quietly. The old man remained silent for a moment before answering. "One day," he said softly, "you will discover that loneliness and peace are not always the same thing." Then he reached into his coat pocket once more and handed Lucas a small silver key. "Tomorrow night," he said calmly, "bring this key back to the bridge. There is one final thing you still need to see." The following night, Lucas returned to the bridge carrying the small silver key tightly in his pocket. The air felt colder than usual, and thick fog rolled slowly across the river beneath the wooden planks. But this time, something inside him felt calm. Not because life suddenly became easier, but because he was no longer fighting the truth. The old man stood near the center of the bridge, waiting quietly beside the lantern. Without saying a word, he motioned for Lucas to follow him toward a small wooden door hidden beneath the far side of the bridge railing. Lucas had crossed this bridge many times before, yet somehow he had never noticed the door. The old man smiled gently. Most people never see it, he said softly, because they spend their entire lives staring backward. Lucas slowly pulled the silver key from his pocket and unlocked the door. Inside was a narrow staircase leading upward toward a small platform above the bridge. As Lucas climbed the steps, the sound of the river below slowly faded behind him. When he finally reached the top, he stopped breathing for a moment. The view overlooked the entire town. Every streetlight glowed softly beneath the night sky. Houses stood quietly in the distance while the river reflected moonlight like flowing silver. For years, Lucas had lived in this town without ever seeing it from this perspective. The old man stepped beside him and rested one hand on the railing. "Perspective changes everything," he said quietly. Lucas stared across the horizon in silence. Suddenly, all the pain he carried over the past months began making sense. The loneliness, the distance from old friends, the guilt for changing. He finally understood those feelings were not signs he was failing. They were signs he was evolving into someone new. When people grow, the old man continued softly, they often believe they are losing their old life. But in reality, they are discovering which parts of their old life can no longer grow with them. Lucas nodded slowly while cold wind moved around them. "I used to think I needed everyone to stay," he admitted. "Now I realize some people were only meant to walk beside me for part of the journey." The old man smiled gently. "And that does not make those relationships meaningless." Lucas looked down toward the streets below. Somewhere in the town, his old friends were probably sitting in the diner again, repeating familiar conversations beneath the same neon lights. And for the first time, Lucas no longer felt resentment toward them. He understood now that every person moves through life at their own emotional pace. Some choose growth, some choose comfort, and some spend years standing between both worlds, afraid to let go of either one. The old man turned toward Lucas one final time. "Do you know the hardest part about becoming a different person?" he asked quietly. Lucas shook his head. The old man looked toward the horizon and answered softly, "It is accepting that not everyone who loved your old self will understand your new one." Silence settled gently between them while the river continued flowing beneath the bridge far below. Then, slowly, the old man handed Lucas the lantern. "Take it," he said. "Why?" Lucas asked quietly. The old man smiled with peaceful eyes. "Because this bridge was never meant to trap people here. It was meant to help them continue forward." Lucas looked down at the lantern glowing warmly in his hands. When he lifted his eyes again, the old man had already begun walking back into the fog at the far end of the bridge. And as Lucas stood alone above the sleeping town, he finally understood something that changed him forever. Growth is painful not because life removes people from your path, but because every new version of you requires the courage to leave an old world behind.